It's kind of like, what is electricity?
There you go.
We don't really know what it is, but we know what it does. We know how to harness it, and we know how to track it. And energy is very similar. But we could debate for quite a while on what it is. But specifically what it does and how one uses it, that we can discuss freely, because we are moving into times where more and more we're hearing about energy work and energy healing and the energetics of things, the human frequencies, the human resonance responses, and things like this. You know, on a basic level, energy is thought. It is in the wording, in the intention, which produces this circuit, this energetic circuitry. I connect with my higher self because my higher self is resonant and conscious of these energetic frequencies. And I connect with another person the same way through their higher consciousness. And there's an intelligence in the health of the system, health with a capital H, that responds energetically and understands intellectually. So you can have a conversation, you can ask questions, and you can determine things and shift things in a person's body, or at least help them to shift. Ultimately, all healing and anything that happens, good or bad, to a person happens because of that person. An energetic healer, quote unquote, is just a facilitator. You know, I can only facilitate so much. The person receiving it has to really take the connection and allow it to express itself to its end. So, establishing energetic work as thoughts, as an intention, we are talking about consciousness and mind. It's kind of like you can sit quietly and you can focus your mind on certain parts of your body, let's say your feet, and you can tell your feet to relax. And in a few moments, you'll notice that your feet are very relaxed. Well, that's a real basic form of energetic work, because you just relayed an intention to the body in thought, and it expressed that thought when you felt your feet relax. And then you can shift that thought up to the leg and the knee, the hip, thigh and the hip, all the way up. You can relax your body that way. Well, this is a real basic form of energetic work. I don't know at what point I learned about energetic work, because it wasn't something that I was familiar with. But I know that early on, like for example, when I had the motorcycle accident and I was brought into the hospital, there was no feeling in my left leg. So being in a state of shock and being conscious, I thought, well, this is not a very good sign. And plus the doctors were kind of shaking their heads and walking away. So I took it upon myself to visualize my blood pulse from feeling my blood pulse, because I could feel my pulse, and I felt that pulse going all the way down into the leg and the foot. And pretty soon, when they came back, there was feeling down there, where as 15, 20 minutes before, there was no feeling. Well, years later, and then at the time, instead of preparing to amputate my leg, they prepared to save it. And, through a series of events, they did save my leg, and I've had to learn to live with, that. Anyway, that visualization, that's a real simple, basic form of energetic. You're having an intention, you're visualizing it, you're conscious and you're focused. That's also extremely important, is once you have the intention, is to be able to hold it. And holding it is extremely important, because it needs to be held in consciousness. It needs to be held in respect. You can't energetically work with an intention and then have some ulterior motive, for example. That doesn't work. That's a conflict of interest there. Actually, the energetic work rarely works on anything negative. It has to be positive. Like, for example, it works really well on healthy tissues. It doesn't do very much on pathological tissues. It doesn't do anything on chemistry either, because chemistry has a lot of variables. For example, blood. Well, there's a lot of chemistry in blood. Things from what we eat are processed through the stomach, the liver, and then, it's put into the bloodstream. And there's a complex relationship, and at the chemical level, having to do with things that we have control of, like what goes into our mouth. Actually, we have control of both ways, what goes in and what comes out. So bringing one in control helps to bring the other in control also. But that's another issue. So this energetic work does respond to healthy tissue. It responds really well to tissues, and to tissues such as muscle, ligament, tendon, bone. It also is very good with nerves and commanding some organs and some of their hormonal secretion responses or rates, depending on which organs they are and what the problem is. Sometimes they overproduce and sometimes they underproduce. There are certain triggers. Triggers is an old word, but it's a very good word, because there are things that trigger events in our body. One of the things that triggers is our patterns of doing things. And you learn, like, for example, if you have a habit of, overeating food with a lot of fat, oil, salt, carbohydrate in it, where you get kind of like a gallbladder attack response, where there's so much going into the system that it can't process it properly, so it puts too much bile into the system. Too much bile into the system, a person becomes very activated, very kind of bilious in nature. That's where the word bilious comes from. It's from the bile excretion of the gallbladder. The same thing with alcohol consumption. The liver is purposed with filtering it out of the body, but it can't filter it out faster than it can be put in the body. So that becomes a problem, especially if the person is putting in, distilled alcohol, every day. Then all of a sudden conditions happen. But anyway, that's the chemistry part. The part about how do we get this health to express itself within the system. You can get, things in the spine adjusted. You can bring the nervous system under control. You can reduce some of the emotional charges set upon the nervous system. Emotions are extremely deadly, bad emotions. In terms of the human body, they are, because the body has to process these emotions. So what it does is it stuffs it somewhere. And so that there are places, the weak places in the body get stuffed with these emotional things that turn into these traumatic loops where something will be happening, and then all of a sudden people get different symptoms, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, it's called now, or different kinds of things that keep repeating themselves because of these looped patterns that are stored in the body from traumas or emotions. It's like learning to let go of the emotional attachment to memories. The memories are fine. The emotional attachment can wreak havoc, especially if they're negative memories, and especially if we keep reliving them in our mind. You see, it's the emotional part that the body needs to keep reliving. It's not the event. And to be able to separate that. So, moving forward in receiving the energetic healing or the energetic work, it's important as a recipient, to be a little conscious of, the subtle nature of this work, and to understand that this work is kind of like it's kind of like when you're building a sculpture in clay. You have to prop up things till the clay dries enough to hold the shape on its own. Well, work is like that. For example, if you get the vertebra in the spine in the correct position it's supposed to be in, well, it might take a few weeks for that person to hold it there. And by holding it there, in other words, don't do activities which will pull it back out. The classic thing is you get something aligned in a person's body and they don't feel it anymore, so they think they're fine. Well, then they'll go pick up 40 pounds of groceries in 2 arms and walk up 3 flights of stairs and wonder why that vertebra popped out again. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification, but it's actually an example of what we do because we're not consciously thinking of. So it's important once, we get older and these things become expressive in our lives. We go to the doctors and we find out that the doctors can't really do anything to help me. They don't know what I have. They're searching. It's costing me a lot of money, you know. So people begin looking for alternative ways. And eventually, a person has to come to the sense and the understanding that it is they that are going to heal themselves, ultimately. Whatever happens, you know what you're feeling. You know if what is being performed or given to you is working or not. You know this personally. And the same way with beginning to understand how to approach health in our bodies. There's so much information nowadays on diet, on exercise, on lifestyle, so that at an early age, you begin to form these habits that when you get to an older age, you're not wreaking so much havoc in your body. And it is literally true, the saying that people spend the first 40 years of their lives tearing themselves up, and the next 40 years of their lives trying to put it all back together like Humpty Dumpty. And this is true. I've experienced it myself because I did tear myself to pieces. And I am in the process of trying to reintegrate and put all that back together. Even though it's never going to be like it was, at least it's some semblance of what it used to be. And that's the best we can hope for. We learn, those of us that have experienced traumas, that you never go back to the way it was before the trauma. You have to move forward with how the trauma has compromised you or not. And if it has compromised you, you have to learn how to live with that and how to compensate for it. For example, you hurt the right side of your body on your legs and your hip. Well, the left side of the body is going to work harder to compensate for what the right side can't do originally. Now, some people understand that at a certain point when the right side gets better, they can make an adjustment so that they can integrate the left back. And then some people don't make that connection so that the left compensates for the next 20 years. So that it comes to a point where then the left becomes worse than the right. You see, the right's gotten a lot better. Now the left has gotten a lot worse because it's overcompensated. And again, these are, of course, gross generalizations, but they do happen specifically to individuals here and there. And you observe it working on people. And some of the most obvious things to you are not the most obvious things to others. So a person that has no understanding and no references for energetic work, for healing modalities, well, they're not going to know a lot of things. And there is not a lot of information out there to support the person receiving, which is one of the reasons that I was interested in these presentations, for the person receiving to understand, well, how can I better receive? What can I do to maximize what I receive? And then what I can do to maintain a balance and equanimity in my body, to stay in neutral. And how can I move forward in this way? And so this is, part of the thinking that is going into these presentations. It's important for a person, and this will be our next discussion, which is thought management. It will become very important for a person to understand, what it means to take control of their lives to take responsibility for their lives, responsibility for their health, their healing, their exercise. They can't, yes, you can share this with others, but you can't rely on somebody to show you this. This you have to want yourself. You have to do the research yourself. And hopefully these talks will help support and be used as guides to further look into things, information deeper. Because there is a lot of information out there. And not all of it is conflicting. The difference between conflicting information and the way it's represented has to do with the language. Different people use different language modalities.
Right.
People at different ages in their life talk differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, modalities and what things are called when you're young is not the same as they were going to be when you get old. Because when you get old, you're thinking, well, this is what I've always called him. Now people will be calling him something differently. So you're constantly always having to assimilate the language differences.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we could each be saying the same thing, but with different words.
Right.
And that's called the 5 blind men describing an elephant, because each of them are going to be describing an entirely different part, especially when you describe the tail as opposed to the ears, as opposed to the feet, as opposed to the snout, or as opposed to the tusk.
Mm-hmm.
Different parts of the elephant, but it's all the elephant. So this is also part of understanding in our own minds what it is going to take to really manage our health. You know, if you're able to still run, if you're able to still do things, if you're able to still have a really good diet and you sleep well, support that. Because when you get older and you start getting compromised, you may, like for example, the first thing is you're losing sleep. You're not sleeping all that long. You may be sleeping in 3 or 4 hour increments now, you know. So the quality of health diminishes because the body is not able to do the work because you're not sleeping as deeply as you used to. So there are things that, you know, and the body begins to slow down because the energetic in our body is slowing down. You know, we are not supporting our bodies, you know, with healthy exercise, healthy, you know, lifestyle choices. You know, a lot of times when we get older, you know, we have a lot of traumas in ourselves and the families. You know, we're holding on to these things. We get depressed. You know, we overdrink caffeine, you know, and we get depressed, and, you know, these things start transferring into the body. You know, pretty soon your shoulders are all tight, and then you wake up one morning and it's called you slept wrong. You know, you can't twist your head, or you can't move your right arm, or your shoulders don't work, or, you know, it's transferred down into your hip now, you know, and then it's, you know, sciatic starts happening, and then, you know, you don't know how to get rid of that, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's so you can, in a short period of time, wreak a lot of havoc. So it is important in understanding health to understand how to prevent things that are negative in the body from happening. And that's really what that is all about. And we will, of course, talk at length about thought management.
Yes.
And the relationship between the person giving the treatment You know, it's called energy healing, but the healing is not really from the person giving the treatment. The person giving the treatment is just facilitating. The person's ability to receive it properly is the true healing, because we ultimately heal ourselves. You know, we doctors, surgeons, psychiatrists, all these people can only do so much for us. They can only stand us back up straight, point us in the right direction, but they can't walk it for us. They can't live it for us. They can't make our decisions. We have to do that. And at some point, we have to take control of ourselves. However it is, a really good way to take control of your mind is to begin to practice meditation. There are many techniques available, breathing techniques even, in meditation to bring a person's mind so that you can have more control of yourself, more control of your mind, more control of your life, and increase a greater ability for happiness to express itself in your life and joy. Those of you that are in relationships know at a certain point the difficulty, because living creates tension in relationships, and how you adjust that tension or not is going to reflect in the relationship. It's going to reflect into the individuals personally, and then it's going to transfer into their bodies. So, you know, if you have not already established a way to deal with these tensions in the relationship, well, things are going to start mounting up on themselves and becoming a little profound within each of the individuals, and then it will be, you know, and it becomes more difficult because now both of you are needing, you know, physical work to move forward. So I'm not sure if I have completely expressed everything about the energy work that I wanted to, but I know that as we proceed forward, we will touch upon anything that we may have missed, because it's not extremely difficult. I've noticed that the energetic work is extremely effective in people. The healthier a person is, the greater response the energy work seems to have. For example, I got to observe on a Zoom call one night a friend of mine who was just coming down with this head cold, congestion, and this whole nasal thing, and going into his throat and his lung. And he was getting ready for this big weekend, 3 days away. So I asked him if I could work on him. And he said yes. So I worked on him energetically, and for about 15, 20 minutes. And I was doing things like I was commanding the cell walls in his nasal sinuses to resist any microbial bacterial infection, because it's usually airborne at that point. And then the infection lodges onto the surface of the cavities, the nasal cavities, or the sinus cavities. There are four sinus cavities in the head, and then of course the nasal, and then it goes out into the esophagus and bronchial tubes of the lung. Well, as I'm working on him, I'm observing him, kind of sniffing and looking to see where it went. You know, because it had cleared. And within 20 minutes, the congestion had cleared, the sinuses has cleared, his coughing had cleared, his sneezing and sniffling had stopped, the mucus discharge had completely stopped. And he was a Seventh-day Adventist. They're vegetarians mostly, and they're very healthy. And he was a very healthy person. And I noticed how his tissues responded so quickly. He was impressed. Well, I was also. And you know, you can see things like this with energy work that, you know, it'll happen one way with one person, and you get to another person, and everything you do, it runs into a wall. You know, all of a sudden, it brings up something that the person can't do. They can't go there. I mean, it's really interesting that very similar things, but two different people who get two completely different responses. So this further supports the notion of the person being able to heal themselves. If they can't begin to manage their thoughts and begin to take control of their life, well, they're going to have difficulty, you know, and it's going to be no one's fault. And no one is going to be able to help them, because the thing that needs to be done is the initiative that they need to take to get what it is that needs to be done, so that what needs to be done is cleared out of the way, so now this greater thing can come into their lives and express itself. Even when a person thinks they have no choice at all, there is still one choice available. And it's usually when you're down to one choice, of course, it's the most difficult choice. But it is still a choice. Now, a person may have 1,001 reasons and excuses why they can't do something. But all a person needs is one reason to do something.
Right. Right.
So coming into a greater understanding of this will help a person in understanding a little more about the human dynamic of this work, and that there is nothing miraculous intended or going on here. You know, it's real work, and it takes place incrementally, a little bit at a time, and the body can only do so much at one time. You may want it to go all the way, but it can't. All you have to do is go put on your jogging shoes and running shorts and go run to the next town. And you'll find that after, 3/4 of a mile, you may not be able to go much further, or maybe 2 miles. But there's still 30 miles to go. So the same way with the body, it does incrementally a little bit at a time. And in that respect, that's why it's important to hold what you do receive from the energetic work until it begins to take form. It's like changing a behavior. First, you have to realize in your mind that the behavior needs changing. Then you have to own up to the behavior. Then you have to have a plan of how you're going to change it. And you don't like just think of how you're going to change it and all of a sudden it's going to happen. It's like you don't plant the seed one day and eat the fruit the next day. The plant has to grow first. Well, the same way in your body, a habit or a behavior pattern has to be developed for at least 30 to 45 days. You have to hold that pattern because in that amount of time, it takes, I think, 45 days for every cell of the body to have replicated itself. Mm-hmm. So what that does is that every 45 days, you see, the body has an ability to shift or not shift. So if you're intending it to shift, this is one way to express the behavior and begin to hold that behavior pattern so that at a certain point, then that behavior will become automatic. But it doesn't happen just on a whim. It happens with conscious and diligent effort. Right. You have to become responsible. And this is kind of where we're headed with these discussions.
You know, what I'm hearing you say is essentially we already are having a relationship with our body. It's a matter of becoming conscious of it or not. And the body is already having a relationship with you by telling you where adjustment is needed. So really, you know, the relationship pretty much is established already. It's what you're doing with it and how you're calling it. You know, I think when you say the word, I'm having a relationship with my body, it kind of puts it in stone. It makes it an intention. And that is what you are kind of showing us in these discussions. And next week's discussion, thought management, I think, is just, it's a fascinating topic. And I think it's vital in continuing a healthy relationship with self. So thank you for today's discussion. That was very good. You really hit on a lot of good points there.
Well, thank you, Sheila. We are having a relationship with ourselves. But a lot of us are not aware of it. A lot of us are not aware of when our body's trying to tell us something. For example, I remember years ago working on a person that worked in the movie industry. And of course, in the movie industry, she was an editor. So she was working at a machine, at a desk, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they needed this work done, right? And all the while, her arms are aching and her wrists are aching and her body's trying to tell her she needs to take a break. So what happens? Well, then she wakes up one morning and she can't move. She goes to the doctor and it says, well, you have this thing called fibromyalgia. And what fibromyalgia is an immune stress disorder. It's like the body will tell you and send you its proper signals up to a certain point. Then when you don't respond, it's kind of like the person sending you a bill. When you don't pay the bill, well, then the next thing you get is the eviction notice. So what the body does is that it says, okay, well, now you're going to pay attention. So it locks everything down that you can't move. So now your body's got your attention, but you've also developed a pathological response at that, because the body has to resort to a pathological response, and it doesn't shut it off. That's what a pathological response is. In other words, Fibromyalgia just happens and it does not go away no matter what you do. You have to learn how to live with it and learn how to, manage your life around the fibromyalgia now, because your body, who you had a relationship with, was sending you signals and was telling you to take a break. People with carpal tunnel, the same thing. Why are your hands and your wrists tired? Well, maybe it's time to shut it off, the computer, and go to bed instead of spending another 4 hours. And then weeks later, all of a sudden you have a condition where these may sound like gross oversimplifications, but they're actually true cases. And the truth is that a lot of times we're paying more attention to our own needs than the needs of our body,
Right.
or the needs of our spouse, or the needs of our children, or the needs of anything around us. And sometimes, what that expresses is an unbalanced situation, so that we need to bring them more to the balance point. And that's what negotiating life and managing life is bringing all of these variables into balance. And the sooner you're able to do this, the better you will be, and the body will become in being held in balance. Thank you, Sheila.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.